Absolute power tends to corrupt. History is full of rulers who were broken by their throne. But there's one man who's a real paradox, a Roman emperor who had limitless authority, but practiced relentless humility. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal. He wrote, "Do not be disgusted, do not give up, do not be offended, because other people act in a certain way." His focus wasn't on controlling the empire, it was on governing himself. This is the story of that philosopher king, and the specific mental disciplines he used. The ones that let him resist the deepest temptations of command. By the end, you'll have a kind of blueprint, a practical one, for keeping your own integrity in any position of influence. No matter how small, so how people, not as a prize but as a test. What daily ritual kept his ego in check while the whole world bowed before him? The answer isn't in his personality, it's in a set of deliberate Stoic practices. What does true power look like when it wears a humble face? Marcus Aurelius saw the throne as a test. Not a prize, that's the key to understanding him. It flips the whole idea of power. In Stoicism, your job, your wealth, your status, even command of an empire, these are indifferents. They're called that not because they don't matter, but because they hold no moral value. They don't make you good or bad. They're just the material you work with. The only true good is your own virtue, your wisdom, your courage, your justice, your discipline. That's the Stoic dichotomy of control. Marcus had absolute control over the Roman Empire, an external thing. But only partial control over what happened with it. What he had total command over was his internal world, his judgments, his reactions, his choices. The imperial power was the test, his virtue was the answer, and this belief guarded against arrogance. He couldn't be arrogant about being emperor because the title itself was neutral. What he could take pride in was how he performed the duties. The philosopher Epictetus, who Marcus studied, said it perfectly: some things are up to us and some are not. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, these are up to us. Our body, our property, our reputation, our public office are not. For Marcus, the purple robe and scepter fell into that second category. They were not up to him, they were part of the role fate assigned. So where a typical ruler might see the throne as the ultimate reward, a validation, Marcus saw it as a heavy responsibility. A specific set of circumstances to practice being a good human being. That's a profound shift. It transforms a position of dominance into a platform for service. It turns privilege into duty. Think about one external in your own life, your job title or your car or your followers online. How would your relationship to that change if you saw it not as a measure of your worth, but as indifferent material? A test of how wisely and justly you can handle it. That subtle mental shift is the first step toward the humility Marcus embodied. He wasn't humble because he was modest. He was humble because his philosophy gave him no other logical choice. The throne didn't make him great. It only provided the arena where his greatness could be revealed, or where his failure would be spectacular. Marcus Aurelius looked at the imperial purple. He saw a job, a difficult job, a whole web of duties that needed wisdom and patience. It wasn't a divine right, it wasn't a personal trophy. That clear sight, it wasn't an accident. It was a practice, a Stoic practice, the discipline of perception. The Stoics had this idea: our suffering, it doesn't come from events, it comes from our judgments about those events. Our perception colors everything. So they trained to see the world as it is, to strip away the labels, the stories, the extra meaning we add. Marcus practiced this constantly in his private writings. He wrote, "Strip away the legend that encrusts it, see things as they actually are." He was likely applying that to the flattery around him, to the grandeur of his palace. To the symbol of his crown, he was reminding himself, See the throne in its bare essence, not a glittering prize, a wooden chair in a room, a place to administer justice from. To plan for the grain supply, to listen to petitions, the pomp and ceremony that was just noise, the duty was the signal. That mental habit protected him. When everyone tells you you're a god, it's easy to start believing it. But by seeing his role plainly, he could resist that. He could remember he was just a man, tasked with a man's work, who would one day be replaced by another man. Think of a modern parallel, a CEO who earns a corner office. One perception is to see it as the ultimate symbol of success, a reward for being better. That perception breeds ego and distance. The Stoic perception, the Marcus Aurelius view, is to see that office as a resource, a quiet space to think strategically for the company, a tool to empower the team. The title, Chief Executive Officer, it's just a set of responsibilities. The leather chair, the view, they're indifferent, they're not the point. The point is how well you perform the duties. So here's a prompt. Look at one role you hold. Parent, manager, teacher. Are you perceiving it with added ego? Are you attached to the label itself, to the respect you think it should command? What if you strip that away? See it in its bare essence. A parent is a guide for a young life. A manager is a coordinator of effort, a remover of obstacles. When you see it that plainly, the pressure to perform for your own image fades. The focus shifts to the service. That's the power of perception. It's the first discipline and the most crucial, because how you see your position determines everything you do from it. Marcus saw a duty where others saw a destiny. That clear vision was the foundation. Each night, the emperor fought his most important battle, the one inside himself. This was his practice of self-examination, what the Stoics called meditatio. It wasn't a passive thing, it was an active audit, a rigorous check of his own mind. After the audiences were done, the advisors gone, the palace quiet, Marcus would look inward. He'd review the day, he'd ask himself questions. Where was I impatient today? Where did I fail in justice? Did I let flattery get to me? This nightly ritual was his main defense, his defense against the corruption of absolute power. A system of checks and balances, but for his own soul. The philosopher Seneca wrote about this habit. He said the spirit ought to be brought up for review daily. For Marcus, this was the last task, closing the books on his own character. It was non-negotiable. Power doesn't corrupt in one big moment, it erodes. Through 1,000 small concessions, a flash of irritation at a slow servant, justified as your right. A decision made for convenience, not fairness, rationalized by the burden of the job. The nightly review was his tool to catch those concessions before they became habit. It forced him to confront his own excuses with the cold light of reason. Imagine an entry in his journal. Today, I ordered a rebel commander executed. The Senate praised my decisiveness, but in my review I have to ask, was that the most just path? Did I consider mercy? Was my motive the safety of the realm or a desire to show strength? The public saw an emperor's firm decree. The private man grappled with the weight of it, holding himself to a standard higher than political expediency. This practice built a deep, active humility. It wasn't about feeling small. It was about striving for a goodness his position made very difficult. He was his own most demanding critic because no one else in the empire could safely hold him to account. The practice is practical for us. You don't need an hour. You don't need parchment. Consider a short review at the end of your own day. 2 questions. First, where today did my actions fall short of my values? Not in a big failure, but in a small moment. A moment of irritation, of avoidance, of pride. And second, what's one thing I can do differently tomorrow? This simple audit shifts the focus off what happened to you onto what you did with what happened. It turns you from a passive character in your day into its author. That shift in perspective is where real integrity is built, night by quiet night. It's how an emperor remembered he was a man, and how any of us can remember we can be better. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but he thought of himself as a citizen of the cosmos. That was Stoic cosmopolitanism. It was a mental tool. It placed his earthly power inside a much larger context. He used the view from above. You pull your perspective back. You see your city from a distance. You see your country from higher up. You see the whole earth, just a small sphere. You see centuries passing, civilizations rising and falling, and in that view, your own life, your struggles, even your empire become a speck. This wasn't meant to make you feel small in a bad way. It was about proportion. It was liberating. He wrote about the universal substance of which you have only a tiny piece, and universal time of which you get only a brief moment. He thought about all the emperors before him who are forgotten now. He thought about all the people in his own time, each one the center of their own story. This cosmic view made humility logical. How can you be arrogant about a province when you're a citizen of the universe? How can your power feel ultimate when you're just a temporary steward on a small planet? His throne wasn't the peak of existence. It was a duty station in a grand scheme. For a leader today, it translates: a CEO might try the view from above. Zoom out from the quarterly report. See your company as one small part of a global network. See your career as one brief chapter in a long story. This doesn't make your work unimportant. It clarifies its scale. It takes the ego out. The stress of being the most important person fades when you remember you're in one room, on one floor, in one city. So here's a challenge. Take a current worry about your status or control, maybe a missed promotion or a project that feels like everything. Mentally do the view from above. See that concern from the perspective of your whole lifetime, then from your community's history, then from the scale of human history. Does the problem change shape? Does the need for personal credit soften? This cosmic citizenship is the antidote to self-importance. It turns the hunger for power into a commitment to play your part well, however large or small it seems from the ground. For Marcus, ruling the known world was his part, and seeing it from above let him do it with a humble hand. Some people might have enjoyed being emperor. Marcus Aurelius learned to love the duty of it. That's the heart of Amor Fati, loving your fate. It's not about enjoying every moment. It's about accepting your circumstances. Your specific lot in life, accepting it completely, and then finding purpose inside it. For him, fate gave him the throne. Amor Fati meant embracing not the glory, but the immense labor it required. He wrote in his meditations, "Love the humble art you have been taught, and take rest in it. Go through your whole life, be content with it." He's talking about his craft, the craft of ruling. He's saying, don't wish for a different role, a more glamorous one or an easier one. Love this one. Pour yourself into its necessary tasks. That mindset changes obligation. It turns it into meaning. He didn't choose his job, but he could choose his attitude toward it. And he chose to see it as his path to virtue, his way to serve the common good. That distinction is everything, craving the trappings of power, the bowing crowds. The wealth, that's a path to corruption, embracing the responsibilities, the long hours, the difficult decisions for security, that's a path to integrity. The privilege was indifferent, the duty was sacred. Think of a parent. No one loves the sleepless nights, the tantrums, the endless worry, but a parent can practice Amor Fati toward the entire role. They can love the fate of being a guide to this young life. They embrace the hard work because it's part of the contract, the sacred contract. The joyful moments are gifts. But the meaning is built in the daily labor, the often tedious labor of care. Marcus saw his empire the same way. The parades were noise, the real work was the signal. The administration, the judgment, the planning, that was his to love. What if the people closest to you were paid to tell you when you were wrong? That's what Marcus Aurelius set up. Other emperors, they'd have flatterers around them, people who just agreed. Marcus did the opposite. He brought Stoic philosophers into his court. he called them his teachers. He gave them real influence. Historians call it a rustic court, a circle where the emperor wasn't the master, he was the student. The most well-known was Junius Rusticus. A Stoic thinker, Marcus didn't just talk to him now and then. He made Rusticus a consul, brought him into the daily work of governing, and then he listened to him. He'd submit his own decisions for Rusticus to review. He accepted the corrections. This was a deliberate choice, an institutional check on his own ego. By keeping a philosopher right there, he had a constant voice, a voice that could remind him of virtue, a voice with the permission to say that was impulsive or your anger isn't just. He wrote about this gratitude. In the Meditations, he lists his teachers. From Rusticus, he says he learned to read carefully, not to be satisfied with just the gist. He learned to avoid fancy rhetoric and poetry and fine writing. He learned to see that his character needed correction, needed therapy. Think about that. The most powerful man in the world, crediting his tutor for teaching him to be careful, to avoid flashy speech, to work on his own flaws. This wasn't ceremonial. It was a statement of principle. His power didn't make him the final authority on wisdom. He stayed a seeker. For us now, it's not about hiring a philosopher. It's about consciously finding the people who will give you honest, critical feedback, not the people who always agree, not the people who tell you what you want to hear because you're their boss or you sign the check. It's about finding those rare people who care more about your growth than your comfort, who have the courage to say, "I think you missed something here." Or is that reaction really fair? That could be a mentor at work, a trusted friend, a partner who holds you to your own stated values. The key is to voluntarily put yourself in a learning posture with them. To explicitly invite that feedback, to not just tolerate it but to seek it out. So look at your own inner circle. Who plays that role for you? Who's the person you go to when you need truth, not validation? If that person is hard to find, that might be the most important search you can start. Because without that external mirror, our own self-image can become an empire of one. Ruled by an unchallenged ego, Marcus knew an emperor needs a teacher. His humility wasn't just a personality trait. It was a structure he built around himself. A court of conscience where the only throne was for reason. The skull was in the emperor's mind, not a dungeon. That was the practice. Memento Mori, remember you must die. For Marcus Aurelius, it was a daily meditation. It wasn't about fear. It gave him clarity. He'd tell himself, you could leave life right now, and that should shape what you do. What you say, what you think. It wasn't morbid. It was a tool for focus. It cut through everything in imperial life, the flattery, the politics, the small disputes over status. All of it became trivial next to one fact, his own mortality. He wrote about the emperors before him, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian. He thought about how they're all gone now, turned into stories or forgotten. He wrote about the lives once lived in palaces and the lives lived there now. The palace is gone, the people are gone. It's all legend, then myth, then oblivion. He saw his own reign that way, a brief flicker. That perspective was an equalizer. Death doesn't care about your title. The emperor and the slave meet the same end. That truth dissolved arrogance. It made humility a simple acknowledgement of reality. How could he be prideful about a position that was so fleeting? The practice gave him urgency, not a frantic kind, a steady, purposeful drive. If time is limited, you don't waste it on vanity. You focus on what matters. For him, that was acting with justice, courage, wisdom, every day, because any day could be the last chance to do it. Think of a modern leader, a company founder. They might not meditate on a skull, but on the finiteness of their tenure. The company will likely outlive them. Their legacy won't be a quarterly profit spike. It will be the culture they built, the ethical standards they upheld, the people they developed. Remembering the impermanence of their own role shifts the focus. From short-term prestige to long-term impact, It encourages decisions that serve the organization's health, not just the leader's reputation. So here's a prompt. How would your actions change today if you remembered the temporary nature of your role, your job title, your social standing, your worries about influence? If you knew this chapter was ending soon, what would you prioritize? What petty grievance would you let go? What important, kind action would you finally take? Memento Mori doesn't tell us to stop caring. It tells us to care about the right things. For Marcus, it was a constant companion. It whispered during every audience. Every judgment, every moment of potential pride, you are a man and you will pass. Do good work while you are here. That whisper was the sound of a humble emperor. The Roman court was this theater of applause. Marcus had to train himself to be deaf to it. Every day was a performance. Senators would come with elaborate compliments, trying to win favor. Petitioners would praise his wisdom before they even said what they wanted. Foreign emissaries bowing low, their words full of flattery meant to sway him. For a ruler, that constant approval is a trap. It can distort your sense of reality, make you believe you're as great as they say, and the opposite, public criticism, can feel like a personal attack. It sparks a defensive anger. Marcus had to build an inner fortress against both. His Stoic practice was indifference to praise and blame, not because he didn't care about doing well, but because he saw that external opinion is fickle, it's unreliable. The applause of the crowd isn't a report card on your character. It's a reaction to their own hopes, their fears, their desires. One day they cheer you for a military victory. The next, they might grumble about the taxes you raised to pay for it. The person you are hasn't changed. Only their perception has. His teacher Epictetus framed it perfectly. He said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. A compliment is just a sound. A criticism is just a sound. The disturbance, the swelling of pride or the sting of insult that happens inside us. It's our own judgment that the praise is valuable or that the blame is devastating. That's what causes the turmoil." Marcus internalized this. He wrote in his meditations, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but we care more about their opinion than our own." He pointed out the absurdity. We trust our own judgment for our self-interest, yet we outsource our self-worth to the fleeting opinions of others. His solution was to anchor his worth somewhere else. Not in the cheers of the forum, but in a quiet, internal question. Am I acting with virtue right now? Am I being just? Am I being courageous? Am I fulfilling my duty with wisdom? That was the only validation he sought. If he could answer yes, then the praise was irrelevant. If the answer was no, then no amount of applause could absolve him. Think of a modern parallel. A manager leads a project to a successful launch. The team celebrates, executives give glowing reviews. The Stoic approach isn't to reject the celebration, but to see it clearly. The praise is for the outcome, which involved luck, timing, the work of many people. The manager's true validation comes from answering an internal question. Did I lead with integrity? Did I support my team? Did I make decisions based on reason, not panic or pride? If yes, they can enjoy the moment without letting it define them. And the opposite, imagine a project fails, blame is assigned, criticism flies. The same internal question applies. Did I do my best with the information I had? Did I act with good intentions? If the answer is yes, the external blame, while painful, loses its power to devastate your self-concept. You acknowledge the outcome, learn from it, but your worth isn't shattered. So here's a prompt for reflection. Recall a recent moment where you sought praise or felt deeply stung by criticism. Maybe a social media post you kept checking for likes. Or a critical comment from a colleague that ruined your afternoon. Now pause that scene. What internal standard could you have used instead? Not, did they like it, but did I express myself honestly? Not, were they pleased, but did I do my work diligently and ethically? Shifting your source of validation from the external gallery to your own reasoned judgment, that's the practice. It's how an emperor remained steady when the whole world was trying to flatter him or find fault. His court was the noisiest place on earth, and he found his quiet center within it. Long before network theory, the Stoics already saw the universe as a living web. Marcus Aurelius had a word for it, Sympatheia, the idea that all rational beings are connected, parts of a single intelligent whole. Like a vast tapestry, every thread, every color matters to the integrity of the image, and the emperor wasn't the weaver, he was one prominent knot within it. So his power wasn't a license to dominate the fabric, it was a specific duty to help maintain its harmony. That belief changed his rule from command into stewardship. He saw his authority as a tool granted by the cosmos for serving the common good. In his meditations, he wrote a line that captures this duty. He said, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." Rome was the hive, he was the bee. His personal fortune, his safety, his legacy, none of it could be separated from the health of the entire community. His power was meaningless, even harmful, if it didn't serve the whole. That's how he could face plague and war, not with personal grievance, but with a sense of responsibility to the system he was tasked with protecting. It wasn't his empire, it was the human community under his care, and this idea of interconnectedness is practical for any position of influence. A parent is a knot in the family tapestry. Their authority exists to nurture the health of that small system. A manager is a knot in the team tapestry. Their power to direct is a tool for coordinating effort, removing obstacles, helping the entire group function. When you lead from Sympatheia, your focus shifts. You stop asking how a decision elevates you. You start asking how it strengthens the whole network. Does it create trust or fracture it? Does it promote fairness or favor a few? So here's a reflective prompt. Take a moment to mentally map one small system you're deeply part of. Your household, your department, a local group. See yourself not as the center, but as one interconnected part. Now ask, what's one action you could take this week that would clearly benefit the health of that entire system? Even if it offers you no immediate personal credit, that shift from center to contributor is the essence of stewardship. It's how an emperor with absolute power remembered he was still just a part of something far greater. And it's how any of us can find a deeper, more humble purpose in our own circles of influence. He slept on a military cot, not because he had to, he chose to. The emperor could have had the finest linens from anywhere in the empire, but he often chose the hard bed of a soldier. That was a deliberate practice. A Stoic exercise called Askesis. It wasn't punishment, it was training. The goal was to build resilience from the inside, to prove to himself that his well-being didn't depend on luxury. By voluntarily embracing discomfort, he inoculated his character against the softness that absolute comfort creates. The philosopher Musonius Rufus taught this. He was a teacher to many Stoics. He said an athlete trains the body for competition. We must train the soul for life. Luxury weakens the mind, but hardship, when chosen, strengthens it. For Marcus, campaigning on the northern frontier was the ultimate form of this training. He didn't send his generals, he went himself. He endured the same cold, the same rations, the same fatigue as his troops. That wasn't just strategy. It was askesis on an imperial scale. It reminded him of his own fundamental human capacity. Separate from the palace walls, it prevented him from seeing comfort as a right. Instead, he kept it framed as a temporary gift. The practice kept his character hard. Where a life of ease would have made it soft, the modern equivalent isn't about seeking suffering. It's about choosing small, voluntary hardships to maintain your edge. And your gratitude, it could be a cold shower in the morning, choosing to walk or bike instead of driving for a short trip, committing to a digital fast for a weekend, or taking on a difficult, meaningful project, one you know will test your patience and skill. These acts are small rebellions against the expectation of constant comfort. They whisper to your deeper self, you are stronger than your circumstances, you are not defined by your conveniences. So here's a simple challenge. Identify one small, voluntary discomfort you could introduce this week. Something safe and manageable, but outside your normal path of least resistance. It might be skipping a habitual snack, waking up 30 minutes earlier to read, or having a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. The point isn't the act itself, it's the conscious choice. In that moment of choice, you reclaim agency over your comfort. You remind yourself, like Marcus on his cot, that your strength resides within, waiting to be called upon by a willing mind. Power wasn't a right for the Stoic emperor. It was a responsibility to be just. That was the supreme social virtue, the one that gave all the other virtues their direction. Stoic justice, dikaiosine, meant giving each person what was due. Acting always for the common welfare. It was an objective standard, a North Star, and for a man with absolute authority, that star gave a humble, clear purpose. His power wasn't for self-enrichment, wasn't for building a legacy. It was a tool granted by fate to administer fairness. Marcus wrote that justice is the source of all the other virtues. Courage without justice is recklessness, wisdom without justice is cunning. Discipline without justice is just austerity. Only when guided by fairness do these qualities serve the whole. That belief turned his palace from a seat of privilege into a workshop for equity. Every petition, every law, every military order went through one question: does this give each their due? You see it in his decisions. He undertook legal reforms, worked to protect orphans, improved the status of slaves within the law, simplified court procedures to make justice more accessible. These weren't popular, flashy moves for glory. They were quiet, administrative acts of dikaiosine. They came from seeing his role not as a ruler over subjects, but as a guardian for fellow citizens. Take the treasury. He spent heavily from the imperial coffers, not on monuments to himself, on relief for cities struck by disaster, on supporting children of poor families. When advisors might have urged conserving wealth for the dynasty's power, his Stoic justice asked a different question: what is due to these people in need? The treasury was a public resource, so its use had to serve the public good. That constant reference to an external standard justice was the ultimate curb on pride. He couldn't just do what felt good or what bolstered his image. He had to ask, is it fair? That question subordinates the self to a principle larger than the self. It forces you to see others not as instruments of your will, but as ends in themselves, deserving of consideration. So bring this down to a scale we can touch. Think of a recent decision you made that affected others. A work allocation, a family compromise, a feedback conversation. Now evaluate it through that single Stoic filter. Was it just? Not was it profitable or convenient or well received, but did it give each person involved what was fair? Did it act for the common welfare of that small group? That simple, demanding question can cut through our biases, our pride. It can turn a position of influence, however minor, into a platform for service. Justice was the emperor's job description, and in asking ourselves the same question, we reclaim the dignity of that role in our own spheres, the lifespan of a legacy. For Marcus Aurelius, it was very short. He saw time as a river, but not a gentle one, a torrent, something that wears down mountains and washes away civilizations. He thought about this often. He wrote that all things fade into the past and soon are covered in oblivion. Even the most famous names, the biggest monuments, they're just temporary. They're markers in the current. This wasn't cynical, it was clarifying. If even the memory of great deeds gets forgotten, then the chase for glory is a fool's errand. Why exhaust yourself building a monument the river will just sweep away? This insight didn't lead him to stop acting. It freed him. He could act for the right reasons. The value was in the doing itself, in its virtue, not in how long the echo lasted in history. He gave an example. He wrote, "Consider the times of Vespasian. You'll see all these things: people marrying, having children, getting sick, dying. They're fighting, feasting, trading, farming, flattering, asserting, suspecting, plotting, praying for others to die, grumbling about their lot, falling in love, hoarding wealth, seeking high office and power, and now that life of theirs is gone. Vanished, pass on to the reign of Trajan. Again, it's all the same, and that life too is gone." Then he makes this point: it's humbling but also peaceful. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both came to the same end in death. They were returned to the same elements. The conqueror of the known world and the man who tended his animals shared the same fate. Their stories, different in scale, were both subject to the river. This attacked the ego's last stronghold, the desire to be remembered, to live on in myth. Marcus saw that posthumous fame is just another external, another indifferent. It's not up to us. We have no control over how we're remembered or for how long. The only thing truly up to us is the character we cultivate and the virtuous actions we take today. This Stoic view is a counterpoint to our culture now. Today there's pressure to craft a public image, to build a legacy online, to curate a story that outlives us. The Stoic approach asks a disruptive question. What if you poured that energy not into managing perception, but into doing good work right now for its own sake? What if you focused on being just in your dealings, courageous in your challenges, disciplined in your habits, and let the legacy take care of itself? It's the difference between building a statue and planting a tree. The statue stands for a while, but it weathers. It can be toppled. The tree provides shade and fruit while it lives. And when it's gone, it returns to the soil to nourish what comes next. Its value was in its function, not its permanence. So here's a prompt. What would you do today? What action would you take? What kindness would you offer if you knew your name would be completely forgotten in 100 years? That no plaque, no digital record, no family story would carry it forward. Your work, your character, your impact would dissolve into the anonymous flow of history. How does that change your to-do list? Does it make the pursuit of credit seem smaller? Does it make the quiet act of integrity feel larger? This isn't an invitation to despair. It's a liberation. It lets you act from a purer place, unburdened by the weight of how it will look in history books that may never be written. Marcus ruled an empire. He found peace knowing his name, too, would join Alexander's in the river. And in that acceptance, he found the freedom to be fully, virtuously, humbly present in his duty. He spent years governing provinces, but his main campaign was defending one internal fortress, the Stoic idea of the Inner Citadel, a place nothing outside could ever break into. Not losing an army, not a senator's betrayal, not even the pain in his own body. His real empire was the territory of his own mind, and his sovereignty there was the only kind that mattered. He wrote about this retreat: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. See that, and you find strength." That strength came from a shift. He stopped trying to control the world and focused entirely on controlling his reactions to it. External command meant nothing if he was a slave to his own anger, his own fear, his own craving for comfort or praise. A ruler who can't rule his own passions is the most pathetic kind of tyrant. The citadel's walls were built from reason. Its gates were guarded by disciplined judgment. Inside, there was tranquility, not because the world was peaceful, but because the noise of the world was kept outside. That's where true freedom lived for a Stoic. It wasn't political freedom, it was psychological freedom, the freedom to choose your response no matter the circumstance. Marcus would practice retreating into this space, in the middle of a chaotic war council, or while hearing endless petitions. He could mentally step back. He'd observe his own initial impulses, that flash of irritation, that surge of pride, and then, from the quiet of the citadel, choose a wiser path. he wasn't suppressing emotion. He was creating a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap he found his power. Think of a modern scenario, a project manager in a high-stakes meeting. The client is being unreasonable, deadlines are shifting, the team is looking to them for direction, pressure is mounting. From the outside, they seem to have little control. But inside their own citadel, they have a choice. They can react with panic, blame the client, spread anxiety, or they can retreat for a mental moment. Acknowledge the stress, then choose a response based on reason. To ask clarifying questions, to recalibrate the plan calmly, to reassure the team. The external chaos hasn't changed. But their internal command changes everything. They lead from principle, not reaction. So look at your own inner landscape. Identify one area where your citadel's walls feel a bit thin. Where does an external event easily storm your gates? Is it a certain type of criticism that always triggers defensiveness? Is it a looming deadline that summons panic instead of focus? Is it the behavior of a particular person that reliably sparks anger? That identified spot is your point of fortification. Your next campaign isn't out in the world. It's right there, building that wall a little higher by practicing that pause, by choosing just once to respond from your reason instead of your raw reaction. That's how you become the unshakable sovereign of your only true empire. Logos saw the emperor and the slave on the same level. That was the Stoic idea of equality. It wasn't about wealth, it wasn't about status, it was about reason, a shared spark, a divine fragment in every rational person. For Marcus Aurelius, that meant the farmer asking him for something, the newest soldier in his army, the servant with his meal. They all had the same basic capacity for virtue that he did. His power was an external accident, a twist of fate, being born into the right family. It said nothing about his soul compared to theirs. That belief took apart any idea of innate superiority. It made arrogance philosophically incoherent. How do you look down on someone who shares the very faculty that defines human excellence? This shaped his rule. In his legal reforms, you see a push for fairness for those with less power, orphans, widows, even slaves within the Roman system. He didn't overturn the social structure. But within it, he worked to acknowledge a common humanity. In personal interactions, that meant listening. Hearing petitions not as impositions from inferiors, but as appeals from fellow reason-bearers. The philosopher Epictetus started his life enslaved. He taught that no one is free who is not master of themselves. A king could be a slave to his passions. A slave in chains could have an unshakable inner freedom. The true hierarchy was internal, not external. That insight flips modern leadership. A leader who embraces this equality doesn't see a title as creating a difference in human worth. They see it as defining a different set of duties. The manager's duty is to create conditions where the reason of each team member can flourish. The employee's duty is to apply their reason to their tasks. But the capacity for wisdom, for integrity, for courage, that's a shared human inheritance. This week, practice seeing that spark in a conversation with someone from a very different tier. A senior executive if you're junior, an intern if you're senior, a service worker. Consciously shift your focus, look past the role, listen for the reasoning behind their words. Acknowledge the shared ground of a mind trying to navigate the world. That simple, deliberate recognition is where humility meets respect. It's how an emperor remembered he was just one citizen of reason in a vast empire of minds. Marcus didn't just hope things would go well, he would actually picture the worst things that could happen. That's the Stoic practice Premeditatio Malorum. The premeditation of evils, and it wasn't about being negative, it was a rehearsal, a way to prepare the mind to face hardship in your imagination first, so you're ready for it later. For an emperor, the list of possible troubles was long: betrayal from someone close, a major military loss, a plague hitting the capital, economic collapse. Marcus wouldn't avoid those thoughts, he'd walk right into them. He'd imagine the situation in detail, not to get stuck in fear, but to ask one question: if this happened, what would a good response look like? Doing that took away the shock. When trouble did come, and it always did, it wasn't some monstrous surprise that could break his calm. It was something he'd already met in his mind. Something he'd already thought through. Seneca wrote about this. He said, "What's unexpected hits harder. Surprise adds weight to a disaster, but if you see trouble coming, you take away its power when it arrives." So for Marcus, the brutal wars on the frontier, the Antonine Plague, even a general's rebellion, these weren't personal injustices. They were just part of the job. They were the storms a captain knows he'll have to sail through. This practice stripped away any idea that he was entitled to an easy rule. He couldn't shake his fist at fate and ask, "Why me?" Because he'd already answered that. Because you're the emperor. This is what emperors deal with, so how will you deal with it well? It builds a deep resilience. It turns potential catastrophes into scenarios you can manage. It changes the unknown, which creates anxiety, into the familiar, which you can meet with a plan. For a leader now, it's the same. Before a big product launch, a CEO might think through a critical bug being found, or a competitor launching something better that same week. By seeing that possibility, they can make backup plans, and more importantly, they can prepare their own response. How will they talk to the team? Will they look for someone to blame or focus on fixing it? Will they cut corners or keep to their standards? The rehearsal isn't about expecting to fail. It's about being unbreakable no matter what happens. So think of a challenge you have coming up, a hard talk, a big presentation, a financial choice. Take a moment, write down the single worst-case scenario that feels possible. Not some wild disaster, but the most reasonable bad outcome. Then, right below it, write your response, not just the steps you'd take, but the character you'd choose. How would you act with courage? How would you be fair to others? How would you keep your integrity? That simple act does something. It moves the threat from a shadow in the future to a puzzle you've already started solving. It means when the storm comes, you're not a victim of the weather. You're the captain who's already checked the charts. You already know how to steer. The emperor's personal rooms were famously bare. Marble halls outside, gold leaf and jewels, but his own space had a simple bed, a wooden stool, his scrolls. That wasn't poverty, it was a statement, a physical form of the indifference he practiced. His visible simplicity worked as a public reminder, to himself and to the court, that a good life comes from virtue, not from the things around you. In a world where power showed itself through opulence, Marcus used a different currency. He wore the plainest robe he could. He ate simple food. He turned away from the elaborate, performative luxury that had taken so many rulers before him. This asceticism was a deliberate curb, a break on the slow, comfortable corruption luxury brings. When you surround yourself with extreme comfort, you start to believe you deserve it. You start to see it as a right, and you start to fear losing it. That fear makes you vulnerable. It can sway your decisions. Marcus removed that vulnerability at the source. He wrote in his meditations, "Despise not death, but also despise the fancy foods, the fine linens, the purple-bordered robes." He called them stage props. They have no character, no soul, no worth of their own. They're just things. By treating the imperial splendor as indifferent props, he kept his focus on the only performance that mattered. The performance of his character. You can think of a modern version, the tech founder who still drives an old car, the billionaire who wears the same simple outfit every day. This isn't pretending to be poor, it's a conscious, intentional choice to not let your identity get tangled in what you own, to prove to yourself that your comfort, your status, your sense of self-worth aren't outsourced to objects. The luxury is available, but it's deliberately declined. That act of refusal is a daily exercise in freedom. So here's a reflective prompt. Conduct a small audit in one area of your life. Look at your subscriptions, your closet, your kitchen gadgets, your entertainment habits. Find one cluster of luxury that's truly unnecessary, not something that brings deep joy or serves a clear purpose, but something that exists out of habit or a faint sense of what you should have. Now ask, what purpose does this actually serve for my character? Does it make me more patient, more courageous, more just? Or does it just make me more accustomed to a certain ease? The goal isn't to live like an ascetic. It's to make sure your comforts are chosen, not automatic, that they're tools, not masters. In that space of choice, you reclaim a piece of the sovereignty Marcus guarded so fiercely. Marcus had to remember what it made a good person. That was the starting point. Living in agreement with nature, that's what Stoicism taught. And for a human, a rational and social creature, that meant using reason to work with others for the common good. But Marcus had a specific nature too, given to him by fate. He was emperor, so his humility came from that. He wasn't aiming for something grand. He was just trying to do the job fate gave him, to do it well. A bee's nature is to make honey for the hive. A human's nature is to act with reason with others. And an emperor's nature was to rule justly for the commonwealth. Zeno, who founded Stoicism, said the goal was to live in agreement with nature. Marcus wrote something similar. He said what isn't good for the hive isn't good for the bee. His power wasn't something he owned, it was a function, a natural function to perform. The ego fades when you see it that way. You're not a star looking for applause. You're a part of a larger body, an organ. Your job is to do your work so the whole thing lives. The humility is in focusing on the function, not the person doing it. Think of a heart. It doesn't boast, it pumps blood reliably because that's its nature, that's its purpose. If it stopped to admire its own rhythm, the body would fail. Marcus wanted to be that for Rome, and this applies to any role. A teacher's function isn't the title professor, it's to spark curiosity, to share knowledge. A nurse's function isn't the scrubs, it's to give care, competent and kind care. The title, the uniform, that's just the form. The function is the real thing. When you connect to the function, the work gets cleaner. Office politics matter less, who gets credit matters less. Your satisfaction comes from doing the function well, from knowing you did your part for the hive. So there's a quiet question. What is the core function of your main role right now? Parent, partner, engineer, artist, friend. Strip away the job title, the label, the story you tell about it. At the most basic level, what service does this role provide? What is its honey? Defining that's the first step. To live in agreement with your own nature, to find a kind of humble excellence in whatever place you are. The emperor's greatest weapon was his own calm. In those years of crisis with rebellion and plague, provocation was constant. Managing anger wasn't just a personal preference, it was a necessity of state. An emperor's fury could lead to mass executions, to unjust laws, decisions made from wounded pride, not reasoned policy. For Marcus, mastering destructive passions was the only way to ensure his power served justice, not vengeance. The Stoics saw anger as a temporary madness, a brief, destructive fire. Seneca called it the most hideous and frenzied of all emotions. He wrote that no plague has cost the human race more. Anger is entirely against reason. It seeks punishment not for correction, but for its own savage satisfaction. It's a form of self-destruction. Marcus absorbed this. His techniques were practical. First, the deliberate pause. Upon feeling the initial heat of irritation, he would create a gap. He would not speak or act in that first moment. The first rule, he wrote, is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. In that pause, he would examine the impression. Is this action truly an injustice or just an inconvenience to my plans? Is it an intentional insult or the result of their own fear, ignorance, pain? By asking these questions, he could separate the event from his judgment of it. He could see the shared humanity in the person who provoked him. They, too, were acting from flawed reasoning, from their own struggles. That perspective dissolved the personal sting. It transformed a potential enemy into a fellow human being who had lost their way. This discipline was the bedrock of humble rule. It prevented power from becoming an instrument of personal retribution. Consider a modern parallel. A manager gets a report that a trusted team member made a critical error, costing a major client. The immediate reaction might be hot anger, to summon that person and berate them publicly, to make an example out of frustration. The Stoic alternative begins with a pause. The manager steps away, maybe for 5 minutes. In that space, they examine the impression. Was this error malice or a mistake? What systemic pressures contributed? What's the goal now? To vent disappointment, or to correct the issue and prevent it from happening again? From that calmer place, the conversation changes. It becomes a joint problem-solving session. It focuses on learning, not shaming. Authority is used to repair and guide, not to punish and assert dominance. The leader's humility is shown in restraint, in the willingness to look for causes beyond simple blame. So here's a prompt. Identify one recurring trigger in your own life. A situation or a type of comment that sparks a flash of anger or deep irritation. It might be a family member's habit, a colleague's tone, the chaos of a daily commute. Now devise one simple pause technique for the next time it happens. It could be silently counting to 10, asking yourself, what part of this is truly in my control? Physically leaving the room for a glass of water. The technique itself is less important than the commitment to create that space. In that small gap, you reclaim your sovereignty from the passion. You choose your response instead of being chosen by it. For an emperor, that space was where justice lived. For anyone, it's where true self-command begins. Marcus Aurelius didn't come up with humble rule on his own. He had a model. His adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, was emperor before him for 23 years. And he ruled with this quiet, steady kind of dignity. It left a mark on Marcus. Other emperors wanted conquest, glory. Antoninus was known for peace. For administration, for patience. He worked with what was possible, not what was dramatic. He showed Marcus that power could be worn lightly, like a well-fitted garment. Not a heavy crown. In the first book of the Meditations, Marcus writes a long passage. He lists the virtues he learned from Antoninus. He writes about his gentle demeanor, his unshakable integrity, his stability. He notes his freedom from vanity, his contentment with simple things, his tireless attention to the details of governing. Antoninus didn't perform greatness. He was just dutiful day after day. He was a concrete model, not a philosopher in a book, a ruler in the next room. Showing how to run an empire without losing your humanity. It was a masterclass in applied Stoicism. Before Marcus ever wrote anything down, he saw that a calm leader creates a more stable realm. That patience in listening finds better solutions than haste in commanding. That personal integrity is the real foundation of political authority. Antoninus proved that humility in leadership isn't weakness. It's a strength that builds trust, that endures. So the lesson is about a real-life role model. Philosophical ideals are essential, but they can feel abstract. A person of exemplary character, someone you watch, makes virtue tangible. They show you the steps, the tone of voice in a crisis, how to handle unfair criticism without bitterness. The daily habits that build a resilient character. Marcus had that guide. He didn't have to imagine a good emperor. He had lived with one. This translates into any field. We benefit from finding our own Antoninus figures, not perfect people, but individuals with specific traits we admire. A former teacher whose fairness you remember. A colleague whose calm under pressure you respect. A family member with unshakable kindness. The key is to move from general admiration to specific observation. What exactly do they do? How do they handle disappointment? What principles guide their smallest actions? so think of one person you admire for their character. Not achievements for who they are. Make a short list like Marcus did. What are 3 specific virtues you see in them? Maybe unwavering honesty, generous patience, quiet perseverance. Then choose one of those traits. For this coming week, consider how you might consciously emulate it in a small, practical way. If you admire their patience, practice a deliberate pause before responding in frustration. If you admire their integrity, look for one opportunity to be meticulously honest, even when it's inconvenient. This isn't imitation, it's integration. Taking a quality you value and weaving it into your own behavior. Marcus didn't become Antoninus. He absorbed the lessons and became his own kind of good emperor. Built on that foundation, our own character is built the same way, brick by brick, virtue by virtue, often using the blueprint provided by someone who showed us the way. The most famous Stoic text we have, the Meditations, wasn't meant for anyone else. It was Marcus Aurelius's private journal, just notes to himself, written often at night during military campaigns. He called them his writings to himself. That's the key. This wasn't a book for publication, not for his legacy or for the Senate. It was a conversation, a dialogue with his own soul, and that choice, it's a humble act. The most powerful man in the world didn't build a monument. He picked up a stylus, wrestled with his own flaws on a wax tablet. He used writing as a tool for self-governance. Writing forces a clarity that thinking alone can avoid. When you have to form a sentence about your anger or your fear, you have to define it. You have to look at it. It can't just be a vague feeling in your chest. You have to name it, and in naming it, you start to understand it. For Marcus, this meant constant self-confrontation. The pages are full of direct commands. Be tolerant with others, strict with yourself. You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to disturb you. Things themselves don't touch the soul. He's arguing with himself, reinforcing the principles he studied. The repetition in the text, that's not a flaw. It's the point. It's the sound of practice. You don't learn a new language by hearing a word once. You learn it through daily repetition. He was practicing the language of virtue. Over and over, writing it down made the lessons stick. It was his personal training manual, a space where the emperor could be his own most demanding teacher, his own most honest critic. There was no audience to perform for, no need for elegant rhetoric, just raw, honest reminders. The style shows this humility. It's fragmentary, it circles back, it admonishes. He writes things like, "Enough of this wretched life and complaining," or "Don't be ashamed to need help." These aren't polished aphorisms for the public. They're the gritty, urgent notes of a man trying to hold himself together under pressure. He's coaching himself through the job. The modern equivalent is journaling, but not the kind for a blog or social media, the private, unedited kind, a blank page for that same honest dialogue, where you can confront your own excuses, where you can write down your principles and then check your actions against them. It's a space for philosophical reinforcement. A daily ego check. You don't need profound insights every day. Sometimes it's just writing, "I felt impatient today in that meeting. Why? What story was I telling myself that made their slowness feel like a personal offense?" That simple act of examination, that's the exercise. It builds the muscle of self-awareness. So here's a prompt. Find a quiet moment later today. Take a piece of paper or a note on your phone that you won't share. Think of one current challenge, a frustration, a worry, a difficult decision. Now write a short, private meditation to yourself. Address yourself as a philosopher would. Not with blame, but with clear-eyed guidance. What is truly within your control in this situation? What virtue could you apply? What would a wiser perspective look like? Keep it simple, a few lines. The value isn't in the prose, it's in the process of turning inward, of listening, of coaching your own character. That's where Marcus found his compass, not in the cheers of the crowd, but in the quiet conversation he had with himself, one written word at a time. The humble emperor understood his limits. He built a throne of many capable hands. Stoic self-sufficiency is a principle for the soul. It means your inner worth, your peace, is independent of outside events. It doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself. In fact, true strength often means seeing what you can't do alone and entrusting it to someone who can. Marcus Aurelius knew ruling the Roman Empire was impossible for one mind. He relied on a vast bureaucracy. He delegated military authority to generals. Men like Avidius Cassius, he appointed skilled administrators to run the provinces. This wasn't a loss of control. It was the intelligent application of power. A humble acknowledgement of reality. No single person, no matter how wise, can oversee the grain supply and adjudicate legal disputes and command armies on multiple frontiers all at once. To pretend otherwise isn't strength, it's folly, a fast track to catastrophic error. Marcus wrote that you can learn something from everyone, even from someone who seems to have fewer advantages. He saw that wisdom was distributed throughout the whole community. His job was to find those qualities in others and put them to use for the common good. That reflects a secure leadership, a humble leadership. It stands in contrast to the micromanaging ruler, the one driven by insecurity, by a need for personal credit. The micromanager believes their value comes from being the only source of decisions. They hoard authority. They fear that another person's success might dim their own light. The humble leader, the Stoic leader, measures their value by the health of the system they steward. They understand that elevating capable people isn't a threat. It's a multiplier. It's how you extend your own virtue through the principled actions of others. Think of a modern project lead, one who insists on approving every minor choice. Attending every meeting, centralizing all communication. Progress slows, team morale sinks, the lead is exhausted, and the project becomes a monument to their control. Not a collective achievement, another lead defines the clear boundaries, the ethical and strategic ones. They staff the team with talented people, give them ownership of their domains. Make themselves available as a resource. The project moves faster, it adapts better, and the lead's legacy is a capable team, a team that can achieve great things without constant oversight. That second approach requires humility. It requires trusting that others can do excellent work. It requires being comfortable with not taking personal credit for every good idea. So here's a prompt to consider. Look at your own responsibilities at work or at home. Identify one thing you handle alone, one task, one project. Now ask yourself honestly, are you the absolute best person for every part of it? Or are you holding on out of habit or a subtle fear of letting go? Is there someone you could collaborate with? Delegate to, or simply ask for help. Acknowledging that limit isn't an admission of weakness. It's the first step toward building something far stronger than you could ever build alone. It's how an emperor ruled an empire, not as a solitary figure, but as the center of a vast and capable network. The Marcomannic Wars were a threat to Rome. They were also his gymnasium for virtue. That's the Stoic alchemy. Hardship becomes material for character. The plague across the empire, the rebellions, the political intrigues. These weren't curses, they were the exercises presented to him, the raw material for his practice of courage, for deepening wisdom, for demonstrating justice. Stoicism says external events are neutral. They're just things that happen. Their moral weight comes from our response. A comfortable reign would have been pleasant, but it wouldn't have offered much chance to prove resilience. A crisis was a direct invitation, a chance to show what his philosophy was made of. Greater challenges meant greater opportunities. A higher difficulty setting in the gymnasium of the soul. More resistance meant his virtue could grow stronger. Marcus wrote it in his Meditations. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He isn't saying the obstacle disappears. He's saying your creative, virtuous response creates a new path. The wall isn't a stop sign. It's the material you use to build a ladder. For him, the brutal northern wars were that wall. They forced him to practice endurance, to make strategic decisions under pressure, to care for his troops with compassion. The plague was another wall. It demanded he govern with calm, provide for a grieving populace, even while fearing for his own family. His response didn't just manage the crisis. It defined his character. It was the action that advanced. Now bring that down from the imperial scale. A common modern obstacle, a sudden career setback. A project cancellation, a missed promotion, an unexpected layoff. The first reaction is to see it as a pure loss, a failure, a derailment of your plan. The Stoic reframe asks a different question. This setback is the material in front of you. What virtue can you practice with it? It might be the chance to practice resilience. To get back up and reassess your path without bitterness. It could be an opportunity to practice adaptability, to learn new skills you had put off. It might even be a forced invitation to practice courage. To have a difficult conversation about your future or to start something new. The obstacle hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has transformed. It's no longer just a problem, it's your current training ground. So here's a reflective prompt. Identify one current difficulty in your life. It doesn't have to be monumental. A persistent frustration, a recurring conflict, a source of daily stress. Name it plainly, then reframe it. Ask yourself, what specific virtue could this difficulty be a training ground for? If it's a demanding person, it's your gymnasium for patience. If it's a financial pinch, it's your practice in resourcefulness and temperance. If it's a health challenge, it's your arena for courage and acceptance. By naming the virtue, you change the narrative. You are no longer a victim of circumstance. You are an athlete in training. The obstacle hasn't moved, but you have stepped into a position of strength. That's how a philosopher king saw barbarian invasions, not as the end of his peace, but as the beginning of his deepest practice. Marcus Aurelius would prepare his mind before dawn. This was a ritual, a mental rehearsal. He wouldn't just stumble into his day, he would prime his inner citadel. The Stoics called this Premeditatio. The morning meditation, it wasn't about emptying the mind, it was about filling it with the right principles. Epictetus gave the method. First thing, say to yourself, today I will meet indifference. Ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty. He said this not to breed cynicism but to disarm surprise. By naming these things ahead of time, you strip them of their power to provoke you. You see them coming and you pre-decide your response. You remind yourself that the only true good is your own virtuous intention. The only true bad is your own vice. Everything else, praise, blame, success, is just material. For Marcus, this meant visualizing the day, the Senate session where men would argue for their own interests. The petitions where people would try to manipulate his sympathy. The military dispatches bearing news that could trigger fear. In his mind, he would meet each person not as an emperor to be obeyed, but as a fellow human to be engaged with justly. He would set his intention. I will meet this advisor with patience, even if he is long-winded. I will hear this petitioner with kindness, even if his request is foolish. I will face this news with courage. This ritual was a buffer between the stimulus of power and his response. By deciding his character ahead of time, he made it less likely that the trappings of his office, the bows, the titles, would dictate his behavior. He entered the theater of power with a script written by his philosophy. You can adapt this, it doesn't require an hour. A modern version might take 5 minutes. Sit quietly, state your core values to yourself, not as abstract ideas but as active intentions. Today I will act with patience, I will listen fully. Then anticipate 1 or 2 specific challenges you know are likely. A difficult meeting, a tedious chore. Mentally rehearse meeting that situation with your chosen virtue. How would patience look in that meeting? How would kindness sound? This isn't magical thinking, it's neurological priming. You are creating neural pathways, making the virtuous response more accessible when the moment arrives. You are becoming the author of your day before the world starts writing its demands. So here's an invitation. For the next 3 days, try your own brief morning ritual. Keep it simple, 60 seconds. Name one value you wish to embody. Visualize one situation where you'll have a chance to practice it. This small act is how you weave your own cloak of intention, how you step into your day, not as a reactor to chaos, but as a sovereign of your own character. Marcus was thankful to be emperor because of the work it meant, not the palace he lived in. That difference, that's where gratitude becomes something that keeps you humble, not entitled. Usually, when people think about power, they feel grateful for the perks, the respect, the comfort, the safety. The Stoic view turns that completely around. It's gratitude for the platform itself, for the heavy responsibility, because that duty, that's the raw material for virtue. It's being thankful for the chance to practice justice on a large scale, to exercise courage in actual crises, to serve the common good with every decision you make. That kind of thankfulness ties you to a purpose. It makes the luxuries seem like distractions. The applause just becomes background noise. The real gift isn't the crown, it's the capacity to wear it well. In his meditations, Marcus doesn't give thanks for his wealth or his military victories. He writes this long list of gratitude for the people who shaped his character. He thanks his grandfather for teaching him good morals. He thanks his mother for her piety and generosity. He thanks the gods that he had the teachers he did, that he wasn't sidetracked by rhetoric or ambition earlier in his life. He's grateful for the circumstances that prepared him for the burden. He's essentially saying, thank you for this difficult training because it equipped me for this difficult service. That's gratitude for the role, not the rewards. This mindset, it's a powerful antidote to that creeping sense of privilege that comes with power. When you're grateful for the duty, you're less likely to resent its hardships. The long hours, the criticism, the impossible choices, those aren't violations of your comfort. They are the very substance of the thing you claim to be thankful for. You can't be grateful for the chance to serve and then complain about the work serving requires. The feeling becomes coherent, integrated. Now you can apply this to any position you hold. A job, parenthood, a volunteer role. Common gratitude focuses on the external benefits, the salary, the flexible hours, the cute family photos, the social recognition. There's nothing wrong with appreciating those things, but the Stoic layer of gratitude goes deeper. It asks, what does this role allow me to practice? To become a demanding job is a gymnasium for resilience and skill. Parenting is a daily masterclass in patience and selflessness and unconditional love. Even a simple role in a community group, that's a platform for cooperation and contribution. Gratitude for that capacity, for the opportunity to grow through service, it transforms the experience. It turns obligation into opportunity, so the next time you feel frustration in your main role, pause, try this reframe. Instead of focusing on what you're getting from it, focus on what it's asking you to give. And be thankful for that very demand, because that demand, that's the invitation to build your character. Here's a reflective prompt. Take a moment to write down one thing about your primary role that you are grateful for. But with a strict rule, it cannot be a perk, a benefit, or a reward you receive. It has to be something about the duty itself, the service it enables, or the growth it demands. It could be as simple as I am grateful this role asks me to listen deeply, or I am thankful for the chance to solve complex problems for my team, or I am grateful for the daily practice in patience it requires. That single sentence, anchored in duty, it can recalibrate your entire relationship to your position. That's how an emperor remained a servant, and how any of us can find deeper meaning in our own stations. Marcus Aurelius went to war with a particular idea in mind. It was a philosopher's caveat, the Stoic reserve clause. In his campaigns against the northern tribes, he committed his legions fully. He planned the strategies, he endured the harsh conditions, he demanded the best from his generals, but internally he held the outcome lightly. His real commitment was to the virtue of his effort, not to a specific victory. The formula was simple: I will strive to win this battle, fate permitting. That last part, fate permitting, that was the clause. It wasn't a hedge, it wasn't an excuse for half-effort. It was a declaration of reality. He could control his tactics, his courage, his endurance. He could not control a sudden storm, an enemy's unforeseen maneuver. An outbreak of illness in the ranks. The reserve clause separated his moral responsibility, which was total, from his attachment to the result, which he released. And that protected him from the two poisons of leadership, the hubris of absolute certainty before an action, and the crushing despair of perceived failure afterward. He could be defeated in the field without being defeated in his soul. Seneca captured this. He wrote that the wise man considers both sides. He knows the power of error, how uncertain human affairs are, how many obstacles stand in the way of a right outcome. He commits to action, but he commits the result to fortune. He is prepared for either outcome. For Marcus, this meant he could campaign for years, face brutal setbacks, staggering losses without being broken by them. He mourned the fallen. He adjusted his plans, but he did not see a lost battle as a verdict on his character. His character was expressed in how he continued, in how he learned and adapted and persisted. This applies to any major undertaking, a creative project you care about. Writing a book, launching a business, pursuing a promotion. You can pour your absolute best effort into it. Research, draft, revise, network, practice. You can do everything within your power. Yet the final acceptance from a publisher, the market share, the decision of a hiring committee, those contain elements beyond your control. Applying the reserve clause means stating to yourself, I will do everything I can to achieve this, fate permitting, and that doesn't dilute your effort. It actually frees you to give your full effort because the fear of failure no longer paralyzes you. Your worth is no longer staked on an unpredictable outcome. It's anchored in the quality of your attempt, your integrity, your diligence, your courage. Those become the victory regardless of the external scoreboard. So here's a prompt. Identify one current goal that feels heavy with pressure, something where you've tied your sense of success to a specific result. Now state it aloud with the Stoic reserve clause. Say, I will do my best to achieve this, fate permitting, and feel the subtle shift. The goal hasn't changed. The plan hasn't changed, but the weight of the world lifts from your shoulders. You're no longer a gambler betting everything on one spin. You're a craftsman dedicated to excellent work, offering it to a world full of variables. That was the emperor's mindset on the frontier. He fought not for a guaranteed conquest, but for the dignity of a fight well fought. And in that dignified effort, he found a peace no battlefield could ever take away. Flatterers were a bigger danger than barbarian armies. That's how Marcus Aurelius saw it. An invasion could threaten Rome's borders, but sycophancy threatened the borders of his own mind. He didn't see constant praise as a perk of being emperor. He saw it as the most subtle poison, an occupational hazard. It demanded constant vigilance. Because flattery doesn't just make you feel good, it performs a quiet surgery on your self-perception. It replaces your authentic character with a polished, distorted reflection. You start to see yourself through other people's agendas, their fears, their desire to manipulate you. Your own internal compass, the one calibrated by reason and virtue, gets buried under agreeable lies. So his humility wasn't passive, it was defensive. It required an active distrust of praise, a conscious effort to hear compliments as mere sounds, no more true than the wind. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus put it bluntly, He said, just as it's a sign of good health to need no medicine, it's a sign of a sound mind to need no flattery. Flattery was a medicine for a sick ego, a treatment for deep insecurity about your own worth. A person grounded in their virtues has no need for that. They know who they are. Empty words can't alter that knowing. For Marcus, every bow from a senator was a potential trap, an attempt to build a false version of him that was easier to control. If he started to believe he was as infallible as they said, he would stop examining his own judgments. He would stop listening to his true advisors. He'd make decisions from a place of inflated confidence, which is just arrogance in disguise. The poison works slowly. First, it distorts your perception. You begin to believe your press, then it weakens your character. You avoid difficult truths that might contradict the lovely story being told about you. Finally, it isolates you. You surround yourself with agreeable voices and exile the honest ones. That's how power collapses from the inside, long before any enemy reaches the gates. Now translate that to a modern arena, the currency of social media likes. Glowing comments, the workplace yes man who always agrees with the boss. These are forms of flattery. They create a feedback loop that distorts your self-assessment. You start to curate your actions not for their intrinsic worth, but for the validation they'll bring. Your internal metric shifts from, was that good work, to, did people applaud it? The remedy is the same Stoic discipline. It's not about rejecting all positive feedback. It's about subjecting it to immediate scrutiny. When praise comes, pause. Ask yourself, is this an accurate assessment of my effort? Or is it someone's hope, fear, or strategy speaking? Anchor your worth to your own reasoned evaluation. Did I act with integrity? Was my effort aligned with my principles? That internal report card is the only one that matters. So here's a reflective prompt. Identify one source of flattery in your own life. It might be a social media platform, a relationship where you're rarely challenged, or even the voice in your own head that magnifies your accomplishments while minimizing your mistakes. This week, practice conscious discounting. The next time that flattery arrives, acknowledge it, then deliberately set it aside. Recenter yourself on your own sober assessment. What did you actually do? How did it align with your values? That act of recentering is a small rebellion. It's how you protect the sovereignty of your own mind from the soft, seductive invasion of false praise. His compass was logos, not legacy, not likes. That was the source of his humility as a ruler. Every emperor had a choice, governed by the customs of your ancestors, or by your own mood, or by the shifting winds of public favor. Marcus Aurelius chose a different path. He submitted every decision to the cold, clear light of reason, the Stoic logos, this universal principle of rational order. It wasn't just a philosophical idea, it was his operating system. It meant his personal feelings, his desire to be admired, even Roman tradition itself, all had to stand before the tribunal of logic. Did this serve justice? Did it promote the common welfare? Was it coherent with a rational understanding of the world? If the answer was no, then it didn't matter how many senators supported it. It didn't matter if it flattered his ego. This commitment gave him an impersonal, stable foundation for his rule. His humility was in that submission. The willingness to silence his own voice, his own bias, to listen to a higher, objective standard. He wrote in his meditations, strip away the legend. See things as they actually are. He was applying that to politics. Strip away the story of what's always been done. Strip away the personal narrative of what you want to be true. See the situation in its bare, logical bones. What is the most reasonable, fair, and constructive course? That question became his sole guide. You can see a historical contrast. Many Roman emperors before him used the state treasury as a personal fund for grandiose building projects bearing their name, monuments to legacy. Marcus, facing the financial strain of war and plague, used public funds for disaster relief, for supporting poor children, The traditional, self-aggrandizing choice was to build a victory column. The reasoned, Stoic choice was to strengthen the resilience of the people he served. One decision was about crafting a story for history books. The other was about applying rational principle to present need. In modern terms, think of a business leader in a downturn. The choice for popularity might be to lay off a large part of the workforce quickly, to please shareholders, to boost the stock price short-term. The choice based on reasoned principle would be more complex. What is the long-term health of the company? What is our duty to the employees who helped build it? Is there a harder, more innovative solution that preserves both the business and its human capital? The principled path is rarely the easiest. It often earns you criticism from all sides, but it builds a different kind of legacy, a legacy of integrity. So here's a direct challenge. Look ahead to one decision you know you'll face in the coming week. It might be small: how to allocate your time on a project, how to respond to a colleague's idea. Before you make it, consciously set aside two things. First, set aside personal preference, what you would like to do because it's easy or pleasing. Second, set aside tradition, what you've always done or what everyone else seems to do. Now, with those filters off, ask the Stoic question: what is the most reasonable, principled course of action here? What would logic, fairness, and the long-term health of the situation dictate? Make the decision from that place alone. You may find it feels strangely liberating. The weight of opinion falls away, and you are left standing on the solid ground of your own reasoned judgment. That is where true authority begins. For Marcus, philosophy wasn't something he did in his spare time. It was the operating system. It ran everything. It wasn't about reading a scroll once a week. It was about weaving Stoic thought into the whole day. That humility we've talked about, it wasn't a switch he flipped. It was just how his mind worked once the principles were part of it. You look at his schedule: meeting with senators in the morning, that was practice in patience. Reading military reports, that was an exercise in courage. Signing a decree, that was applying justice. Even traveling from Rome to the frontier, the rough carriage, the tiredness, the delays, all of it was material. Material for practicing acceptance, for building resilience. His journal, the Meditations, shows that integration. He didn't write it in a library. He wrote it by candlelight in army camps. On the march between crises, the philosophy was with him in the field, in the council room, at dinner. It was a constant dialogue with his own reason. So his power never ran on autopilot, on just impulse or tradition. That's the shift from studying philosophy to living it. You move the principles from the shelf into the bloodstream. Then, acting with virtue isn't a struggle anymore. It starts to be a reflex. Humility shows up, not because you're trying to be humble, but because you're seeing through a Stoic lens. Where your role is a duty, praise is just noise, and your real empire is inside. You can start this in a modern life. You don't need a legion. It starts with what you could call philosophical moments. Little pauses built into your existing routine. It's not about finding extra time. It's about using the time you already have differently, like when you sit at your desk and open the computer. Instead of jumping straight to the inbox, you take 15 seconds. You state an intention. Today, I'll meet interruptions with patience, or waiting for the coffee to brew. You might recall the view from above. You see your day not as urgent demands, but as a small part of a much bigger story. The goal is to attach a one-sentence Stoic reminder to a routine trigger. The trigger could be opening a door, hearing your phone ring, sitting down to eat. The reminder is your principle. When I hear my phone, I remember most messages aren't urgent. When I sit to eat, I practice gratitude for the labor behind the food. This builds neural pathways. It makes the perspective accessible when you need it. In a hard conversation, under a deadline, when you get a compliment, so here's a prompt: pick one daily activity, something you always do, your commute. Brushing your teeth, that first sip of water in the morning, then attach one clear Stoic sentence to it, a principle you want to strengthen. For the commute, this journey is a chance to practice patience. For the first sip of water, I am grateful for this simple sustenance. The activity becomes your anchor, your trigger. Every time you do it, you silently say your sentence. You're not adding a new task, you're giving an old task new meaning. You're writing your own meditations, one routine moment at a time. That's how philosophy stops being a theory and starts governing your reactions. It's how you build, day by quiet day, that unshakable humility, which comes not from thinking you're small, but from knowing your reason is part of something vast. He left behind borders, yes, but also a kind of blueprint for how a soul can hold up under pressure. That's the legacy of Marcus Aurelius. Most emperors, you remember them for what they built, or what they destroyed, the lands they took, the monuments with their names. Marcus is remembered for who he was, for the private words he wrote to himself. That shift from external achievement to internal character, that's the core of it, the humble legacy. He demonstrated something, not in theory, but in the daily, exhausting reality of running an empire. He proved that virtue is possible, even in the most tempting of circumstances, even when you have every excuse to become arrogant or cruel or self-indulgent. You can choose a different path. That proof is his real gift. It makes him a model of the possible, not some unattainable myth. You don't look at his life and think, I could never do that. You look at it and think, if he could do it there, maybe I can do it here, in my own smaller arena. The fact that we study his private journal, the Meditations, and not just his military edicts or his building projects, that tells the story. His power didn't preserve his memory, his humility did. The man who saw the throne as a duty left a deeper imprint than those who saw it as a trophy. His writings were never meant for us. They were notes for his own survival, and yet they survived. They outlasted marble statues, triumphal arches, because they speak to a universal struggle. The struggle to govern oneself, that's a legacy built on influence, not imposition. It works by invitation, not command. You're invited to look at your own life through his disciplined lens. Now contrast that with traditional legacy building. One approach erects stone monuments. It tries to freeze a moment of glory, to shout a name across the centuries. The other approach, the Stoic approach Marcus lived, plants seeds of thought. It tries to influence character, to offer a method, a set of tools for anyone facing power or pressure. The monument says, look what I did. The method says, here is how you might live. One is about the past, a fixed record. The other is about the future, an ongoing practice. So consider legacy, not as something grand for the history books, but as the subtle imprint you leave on the people and projects closest to you. What kind of legacy are you building through your daily character? Is it one of integrity that others might quietly emulate? A reputation for patience, for reasoned judgment, for calm under fire? When people think of working with you or living with you, what quality comes to mind first? That quality, that repeated pattern of behavior, that's your real monument. It's being built right now in your choices. Marcus Aurelius shows us the most enduring legacy isn't carved in stone. It's written in the choices we make when no one is watching, and echoed in the strength it gives to others who follow. Marcus Aurelius didn't come by humility naturally. He had to build it piece by piece through a daily routine of philosophy. That's the main thing to see. He had all the power in the world, but his character was a fortress he built on purpose. The dichotomy of controls showed him where his real authority was. His nightly review was an audit, a check against corruption. Memento Mori washed away arrogance because of time, because everything passes. Each practice, the view from above, indifference to praise, they were exercises. Training for the soul. His reign shows something. Absolute power doesn't mean you're excused from inner work. It means that work is the only thing that counts. Without it, power eats the person. With it, the person can use power, can turn it toward service. His humility wasn't just a soft trait, it was a philosophical achievement. Hard won, a victory over the most tempting things possible. He leaves this idea: the higher your external authority, the deeper your internal foundation has to be. Your real power isn't over other people, it's over your own judgments, your reactions, your character. In the Meditations he has a line. He says, "Don't waste time arguing what a good man should be. Be one and perform the task you're given nobly." That's the call, not to debate virtue, but to do it. Inside the role life handed you, your stage might be an office, a classroom, a home. The principle is the same. Perform your part with dignity, knowing the script is temporary, but the integrity of the performance that lasts. So we end with an invitation. Look back on the disciplines, the nightly review, the morning meditation, the reserve clause, the view from above. Pick one. Just one practice from that toolkit, and for a week try it, in your own sphere, however small it seems. See what shifts inside, how it changes your relationship to your responsibilities, to your own reactions. The journey of a philosopher king starts with a single, disciplined thought. Which principle will you try first? Share it in the comments. Let's build a community, not of admirers, but of people practicing. Each of us finding a way to rule the only empire that matters, the one inside.